Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am so happy to be here with you again today to continue our journey as we barrel through to the ending of Dancing the Dream. We have only a few episodes left, and I'm really excited to be reaching this point and commemorating everything we've gone through together in this last year. So today's piece that we will be reading is probably the shortest piece in the entire book. And for that reason, this may be a shorter episode, but it is me we're talking about, right? And I have a million things to say about every single thing. So we will see. With that said, though, I have a couple of other things that are kind of on my mind about Michael, things that are connected to things in my life and things I would actually really like to, I don't know, maybe have a little conversation about. But I decided that this week I'm going to mix it up. So rather than starting with some of my, external stories or commentaries, I want to start with reading the piece and discussing the piece first. And then depending on where that conversation goes, determining, all right, let's see if I have more I want to add, So with that said, we're going to get right into this week's piece. So now's the time that I invite you to relax and get comfy and get cozy and join me for this week's reading of Breaking Free. Breaking free. All this hysteria, all this commotion, time, space, energy are just a notion. What we have conceptualized, we have created, all those loved, all those hated. Where is the beginning? Where is the end? Time's arrow, so difficult to bend. Those broken promises, what they meant, those love letters never sent. Well, I wasn't kidding, was I? This is a short piece. There's a lot, of course, I think we can talk about and touch upon, but this piece is so small and it actually is kind of jarring to me after reading some of the more in-depth pieces, but I find that a little bit fun and interesting too. If you're not reading along with me in the book, or if you don't own the book, I want to describe that this very short piece is in white text and it's set against a black box. And that black box is centered on an otherwise white paper. It is on the left side page when you open the book, and on the right side there seems to be a still from the recording of the Panther dance that Michael does at the end of the black or white video. But it's not one of the more familiar shots. To me, it's kind of a side/back profile shot of him. It's very much a shot in motion. And it's a shot that you might equate with taking action in the same way that the title Breaking Free would maybe be thought of. So this is a really short piece. There's only 8 lines. It is a rhyming piece. So we're just going to take it a few lines at a time and talk about what we can glean from this meaning. There's so many pieces in this book that are so developed that this one, because of the length, runs the risk of feeling a little bit undeveloped to me. But I don't know. I mean, I've never slowed down and sat with this piece before. So let's see what we can get from this, shall we? He says, all this hysteria, all this commotion, time, space, energy are just a notion. So obviously the hysteria, the commotion. Those to me remind me of, he doesn't even have to be specific. He's saying all this hysteria and commotion. And you could pretty much look at any time in life, at anywhere in the world, and you will find hysteria and commotion. To some degree, it seems like it's the human condition to be immersed in hysteria and commotion. But he says that these are things that are just a notion. So this hysteria, all the commotion, these are very human things. They're things that we sort of create. But then he goes on to say time, space, and energy are also just a notion. And these are things that maybe are true in actuality, but we don't always slow down to remember how true they are. Like, for example, time is a concept. We get older. Time, our bodies evolve and change. But time as we know it is something we have constructed. The creation of the second, the minute, the hour, the day, the week, the month, the year. These are all values we have created. We have determined that the passing of the sun means something. We've determined that it means something in terms of how we catalog our own lives. Of course it means something in terms of the actual, rotation of the planet and everything, but we have created and attached a meaning to it that absolutely complicates our relationship to life. But he continues, what we have conceptualized, we have created. All those loved, all those hated. And I really like this part because what we've conceptualized, we created. Okay, I can certainly understand that. What we've conceptualized, we've created. The idea has to come first before it becomes this thing that exists. But I love that he adds all those loved and all those hated. Because in the same way that we can choose to love people, we also choose to hate people. And vice versa. So if we can conceptualize someone being worthy of our hate, then we can also conceptualize someone being worthy of our love, and again, vice versa. So it's kind of this emphasis that I really like on how malleable life is. It's not just something that is or isn't. There aren't just people that exist in these different categories or not, and I think that that's something kind of cool about that. It emphasizes that construction of our own reality, which I love and I find really kind of fascinating. Where is the beginning? Where is the end? Time's arrow so difficult to bend. Where is the beginning and where is the end? This is again reminding me of this whole idea that we should understand life in this kind of black and white way, where things should be very obvious and clear to us. And actually, I was journaling a couple days ago about some personal stuff and my own sort of process in healing from some of those things. And I wrote something that I think kind of resonates for me here with this, where is the beginning and where is the end? And I wrote that it's amazing that there is no end to healing. There are only many perpetual beginnings. And when I wrote that, what I really was trying to convey to myself, since it was a journal, was that we often want a clearly defined time period. We want the time of joy or the time of suffering or the time of grief or whatever to be something we can define and capture. And that's not really how life works. And perhaps the fact that we operate in this kind of conception of time, we operate our lives day to day that way, it gives this impression to us that there ought to be some kind of beginning and end that is clearly defined, like the sun rises and the sun sets. But that's not the reality. The reality is life is a lot messier than that. So when he says, where's the beginning, where's the end, time's arrow so difficult to bend, I think what he's talking about here is both the construction of time, in that, we have no way as human beings to really understand when it began and how, and we have no concept of when and how it will end or if it will end. we look at time as this linear thing where it should always be moving forward, but we don't actually know if that's how it works. But it is the only way we understand it. So it's time's arrow moving forward is difficult to bend. Well, we can't look backwards. We can't start over, and we can't backpedal our own steps, And I think there could be both a metaphor here, kind of like the way I was talking about with healing, but also it can be this literal, look at the way we as humans understand the passage of time. I guess because this is called breaking free, I have in my mind that each of these little passages are in some way communicating to us a way that we can free ourselves. And so identifying these notions, I can't help but think, how can we release ourselves from the burden of time passing, which is so burdensome for all of us, So he ends with the final lines, those broken promises, what they meant, those love letters never sent. I see that as really being about this idea that you can't go backwards and you can't change the past, but we can learn perhaps to understand what those broken promises meant, whether that's us breaking promises to someone else or someone else breaking them to us, or perhaps us breaking them to ourselves. I do find it interesting, though, that he ends on those love letters never sent, because it kind of makes me feel there's a sort of regret in this piece, that perhaps he is expressing a kind of regret of those words that you never say and you can't say once the time has passed. I was thinking recently about this crush I had on this person many years ago, and how much I still, every once in a while, think I kind of wish I had told them that about it, despite the fact that I'm in a very happy, loving marriage and I have no interest in that changing whatsoever. I still have this feeling once in a while that I'm like, what would have happened there, And it's not a sense of regret so much as a sense of, the time passes and the opportunity kind of vanishes with it. And that's an interesting thing to kind of contemplate when we have a conversation like this, because in this first stanza, he's talking about how this is all kind of a concept. We're creating all of this. But in the second stanza, there's this real sense of groundedness of these are the real things humans struggle with, though. As I'm looking at the whole piece together and I'm thinking about this first part, everything is just, all these things are just a notion. All the struggle is just kind of something we've created, including those we love and those we hate. And then ending on broken promises and what they meant, the love letters that we never sent. It kind of makes me feel like maybe the overall message here is that we're creating our own reality. So not only do we create in the image of others those worthy of our love or our hate, but we also create the outcome in some way by breaking promises and trying to understand them, and by choosing not to share the love that we do feel. I mean, if anything, when it comes to Michael, I feel like, now I don't know what he would say about romantic love, but I do feel like Michael seems to be someone who embraces this idea of telling those you love that you love them. And that perhaps when we're constructing that reality, we can have our higher self aware of it being a constructed reality, while our more, human self, or our more grounded self, still has to live within the reality we've created. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think there's a few different things happening here. And this is a piece, though, that if I weren't doing this podcast, I think I would bypass pretty easily because of how short it is. Because I might try to understand why Michael didn't write more for a piece called Breaking Free, when that title to me implies something a bit larger. Breaking free from what? And I think if we try to answer that question, there's a lot here that we can look at. But those examples, in a lot of ways, boil down to breaking free from being human, both in terms of our human tendency to construct reality, but also in terms of our human tendency to regret and to make mistakes, So I don't know, this is an interesting piece. And It feels strange to wrap up a discussion so quickly. But what can I say? It's 8 lines, But in all honesty, as I read this piece, I thought about how I could tie in some of the commentary I just want to leave you with in terms of some stuff I've been thinking about with Michael. And I think that in some ways there are some connections. So this is nothing profound. It's nothing new. But the other day I was taking a walk and I was listening to Michael, of course. I do listen to other people, by the way, but it's Michael. I always return to Michael. And I was listening to Michael and I was hearing, sometimes after I listen to an artist that, like a singer-songwriter, somebody who I'm mostly listening to for their lyrics or like their heartbreak or whatever it is, I feel different when I hear Michael. When I hear other people, I feel like I'm listening to like a peer. I'm listening to just another raggedy human. You know what I mean? And when I listen to Michael, I feel like I'm listening to someone both more and less human than anyone else. And by more, I mean Michael's purity as a person, as a voice. His purity is like, I don't want to, paint this too broadly or too dramatically, but he's like everything I aspire to be in certain ways, as a human being. And he has so much good in him, and just like there's just so much there to admire. So in some ways, he's like the most human in the world. He's the easiest person to understand because he's like the most raw, pure human you can imagine. But on the other hand, he's less human because he's so fantastical in every way, and he's so high caliber in every way, and he doesn't feel, I know that he's messy. We're all messy, right? But he doesn't feel messy. He feels like he has every answer when I listen to him. Again, these are just the ways I feel when I listen. I'm not suggesting his humanity is any less than anyone else's. I'm trying to capture the fact that my admiration for him is both grounded in the fact that he seems like the most exceptional example of being human, while also that in and of itself makes him feel less human. I hope that makes sense. So when I listen to other people, I feel like I'm listening to a human peer. And when I listen to Michael, I feel like I'm listening to like this godly kind of creature. And I hope that no one misunderstands what I'm saying here. Like, I've had so many episodes in which I humanize Michael, so bear with me. Anyway, I was listening to him. I had this thought, and it kind of hit me. I'm never going to really understand Michael Jackson. I'm never really going to know him. I can feel like I do, and I can spend, weeks or months or years dissecting him, his work, his choices, his words that he put out there for us, but I'm never really going to know him. And I think actually, it was this morning. Now that I think about it, it was this morning, and I was walking and I was listening to Morphine, which the first time I ever heard Morphine, I am not even exaggerating when I say I had a panic attack. Which again, sounds very dramatic, but if you're still listening at this point, you know who I am and what I'm about. Anyway, I had a panic attack because prior to listening to Morphine, it was very early in my fandom, like a month or two. I listened to it because someone on Reddit, I think, said like, oh, this is one of his best songs, but it's like hard. And I was like, really? And prior to this, I was really only familiar with Michael Jackson from like the Black or White video and Michael in the 80s. And if you watch Michael in like the making of Black or White, or you watch him in the 1980s, he's like a baby doll. I don't know how else to explain it. He's this like warm, cuddly, innocent, gentle creature. And I read Moonwalk at this point, where he had written in Moonwalk about how he would never go down the direction of any kind of drugs or addiction or anything like that. And he wouldn't let that ever harm him or end him or anything. And then I was like, wait, this person, this sweet, adorable, wonderful man wrote a song about morphine? And then I listened to it and I felt sick, like to my stomach. I felt sick because I was like, my God, like this person suffered in ways would never have guessed. Because, I mean, like I said, I was not knowledgeable about Michael. I knew he had died very young. I didn't know anything about the context of his death. I didn't know his full story by any means, just because I lived in the same world as him. I didn't really know anything about him in the real sense of who he was. And when I heard the song Morphine the first time, I was blown away. But first of all, it's a phenomenal song, but I couldn't listen to it again for about 6 months because just the thought of the song made me cry. And not to get too personal here, but I had an ex-husband that was an alcoholic and an addict. And there are lines in that song that really hurt me to hear and resonate very deeply with me as someone who has loved someone through addiction. And hearing that song really kind of broke open this facade I had of Michael was just this pure Disney character type of person. And by that, I just mean very innocent. And not that a person who has an addiction isn't innocent. But what I mean is there's a darkness that is involved in any kind of an addiction that I didn't realize was present within Michael Jackson. And even though it was more of a dependency because of, his accident and the Pepsi commercial and his hair burning and all that, right? It was a dependency, but it still was something he was struggling with. And there's a darkness there. And there's the song Morphine is extremely dark and very painful to listen to. So I guess I was listening to that this morning and I was thinking about how I'll never know the moments of his life that led to him writing that. I'll never know the voices in his head that he heard about himself to himself. I'll never know those things. I'm not privy to them. And there's a reason I'm not privy to them, but I'm not. And I want to be, don't we all? That's why I'm recording this. And that's why you're listening to it. I want to be privy to his inner workings because I want to understand so deeply this person I admire on such a high level. But this recognition that I'll never really know him and that he will always be a mystery to me, it filled me with this real sadness. I mean, I accept it as the reality, but it made me really sad because it made me think about how Michael will always suffer under the weight of his own legacy. And by that, I mean, I don't know if it's possible for even the biggest of fans who would love and adore him like I do to really grasp his humanity, because his humanity is not all that he cataloged for us. And this is something that I guess I would say ties a little bit into my personal stuff. So on the day that this is being released, September 30th, 2025, my first book is being published. Now I'm recording it a couple weeks before then, but just earlier today I did an interview about it and it's on my mind. The fact that I wrote what is part memoir, part research, and it's about trauma and sexual violence. And I am putting this out in the world and I'm about to release it to the judgment of others. And I can't be in the ear of every person reading it. I can't add footnotes. I can't give more context. I have to trust the reader to hear me and to read me and to understand me. And I have to trust myself to be able to withstand if they don't. And I've published my writing many times before. It's nothing new to publish my writing, but it's my first book. And I've never felt that kind of vulnerability before of what it means to create and put something big out into the world, something that takes years and pain and heartbreak and fear. I don't know what that's like. This is my first experience with that on that level. And it made me think about Michael also, and how Michael both bared his soul and also protected it at different times in his career, and how critical some fans are of those choices. The choice to have other songwriters help him. For example, I've read endless critique of the Invincible album, because despite the fact that Michael wrote songs on that album, he had co-writers for many of the songs. And I've seen a ton of very harsh critiques on fan forums about that choice, accusing him of not caring about his art anymore, And that bothers me a lot. I don't like any of that commentary about Michael, but I think about how his entire life was performance art in a way. And how I have this one book coming out. I'm 37 years old. It's my first book. And I feel exposed and vulnerable and nervous. And I'm going to have 12 readers compared to Michael Jackson, who had the eyes of the entire world on him. And just think about, if I'm this scared, how the hell did Michael feel writing his first song that appeared on, the Jacksons album, or writing a song like Beat It, which was not about his own lived experiences, but his sort of imagined understanding, and putting that out there for the entire world, or writing songs like Who Is It, in which he was bearing every pain and heartbreak he felt in those moments, and writing songs like Heal the World or We Are the World, where, people were inspired by them, but people also kind of mocked a little bit too. And making the choice again and again and again to show up for himself, to believe in his art, to put it out there. I mean, that's incredibly brave and difficult, but he did that in service of others as much as he did it for himself. And I think about that, and I think about why he had to self-protect a little bit. Why, after an album like History, where he was so vulnerable and wrote such confessional things, painful things, and called out the injustices of the world, straight on, making eye contact with the forces at be that work to oppress all of us. And he releases this, and then his next studio album, he doesn't do that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, he had some songs like that on there, but it's more reserved on a personal level. And it's still a great album. Invincible's a great album. But maybe there was a little self-protection going on there, where he deserved and wanted to live his life and not have everything be on display. And, here we are 20 years later, and some people criticize those choices. And it's just interesting to me how the loudest critics are often people who could never and would never do it themselves. But because for some reason this person, this artist, is putting themselves out there, we feel somehow entitled to comment on how good of a job they do with it. And it's kind of, I don't know, I guess it's kind of gross to me. I know I'm rambling a little bit, and I'm sorry for that, but I guess I just, when it comes to Michael and this revelation I had about how well will I ever know him, I feel like I can come to some peace about that, as sad as it does make me, because there's no one I want to know more. As sad as it makes me, I can come to some peace about this, because if there's anyone who deserved a little privacy and a little self-protection, it's Michael. It's Michael. He deserved the kind of love that we all think we would give him if we knew him. But the truth is we don't know him, and we didn't know him. And so we don't know who we would be in his lives if we had the chance to be. And I think honoring him and his story and his role in our own lives as fans, if we're being honest with ourselves, has to be like recognizing the necessary and inevitable distance between us and him. And I am so grateful that he left us so much work, musically, in video, in writing. He left us so much to pore over and try to understand. I'm so grateful for that, because it's all we want, right? But I am also glad that as much as Michael gave of himself, he also held some back for himself too. And that I think we need to respect the fact that we're not meant to know everything about this man. And it's not our inherent right to, just because we love him. So I don't know, that conversation went way beyond what I had intended to. And honestly, it's probably a little bit off track from what I had wanted to say about him. But it's all true. And I mean, I feel all of that. And I hope I didn't offend or hurt anybody by saying anything I said. But I think it's really important as we read this book, which he said was so autobiographical, that we grapple with the fact that we might feel like we know his spirit and his soul. But as Michael had said, and I read this last week or a couple weeks ago, in his 1987 People letter, he said, you shouldn't judge someone unless you've walked 2 moons in their moccasins. I think somewhere else he had said, unless you've been there for every sleepless night. And I wish I could say that I had that relationship with him, and I wish I could have been there for things, but I wasn't. And just like I will never be fully understood by anyone, neither will you, and neither will him. And that's both the blessing and the curse of being human. And Michael didn't escape that, because as much as he feels above all other humans to me, he wasn't. He wasn't. He was a human being, and I admire and respect his humanity more than anything. So with that said, thank you if you did listen to this whole thing. I appreciate you listening to my rambling and my thoughts about him. It's just these very honest conversations I want to have with myself and with you about Michael are hard to articulate off the cuff, no script, no plan. But it comes from the heart, and everything I say about Michael and in this podcast is meant from a place of real significant love and respect, more than anything, a very deep, resounding respect that I have for him, and just wanting the best for him always. So with that said, thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening to me talk, if you did. Oh my goodness, bless you if you did. And I look forward to meeting with you again next week to talk more about this beautiful book that is too quickly ending. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week and weekend, and we will talk soon. Take care.